Not too long ago, there were people hired just to handle the little things, keeping things running, bringing stuff to our doors, and making life easier. But somehow, those jobs vanished almost overnight, so fast that most of us barely remember they even existed. Let's take a trip back to a time when these jobs were part of everyday life, starting with the milkman. Before the days of mega supermarkets and massive refrigerators, the milkman was a neighborhood fixture. Every morning, these dairy delivery men would make their rounds, leaving fresh bottles of milk on doorsteps across America. The gentle clink of glass bottles at dawn was the soundtrack to countless mornings between the 1920s and 1960s. For many, this was the original doorbell camera alert, except instead of package thieves, you got breakfast. What made the milkman special wasn't just the product, but the relationship. These weren't faceless delivery people. They knew their customers by name and remembered who preferred whole milk versus skim. In many neighborhoods, the milkman was also an unofficial community watchdog, noticing if something seemed amiss. They were basically Facebook's marked safe feature before Mark Zuckerberg was even born. The profession had its own challenges. Winter months meant racing against freezing temperatures, while summer required early deliveries before the sun warmed their cargo. The jokes about milkmen and lonely housewives were as common then as they are in old sitcom reruns today. It's probably the only profession where resembling the neighbor's child was considered an occupational hazard. The decline began in the 1950s as home refrigeration improved and supermarkets expanded. By the 1970s, home milk delivery had dropped to less than 20% of households. Switchboard operator. Number, please? These two words were once spoken billions of times by thousands of women who literally connected America before automation. Switchboard operators were the human routers of communication, making telephones functional in an era before digital technology. They were essentially human Wi-Fi, except they actually responded when you complained about a bad connection. The job required remarkable dexterity and memory. Operators manipulated dozens of cords and plugs at lightning speed, connecting callers across towns and continents. A skilled operator could handle hundreds of calls per hour while maintaining perfect telephone etiquette. Their hands danced across the switchboard like pianists, though they probably received fewer standing ovations. The profession was almost exclusively female, not because women were better at the job, but because telephone companies discovered they could pay women less. AT&T had strict requirements. Operators had to be single, between 17 and 26, and at least 5 feet 4 inches tall. It was probably the only job interview where "How tall are you?" wasn't considered an inappropriate question. Supervisors monitored operators constantly, timing their connections. The standard greeting had to be delivered in precisely 2.5 seconds. Essentially, they invented micromanagement decades before corporate America perfected it. By the mid-1970s, technological advances had made the profession obsolete. Ice cutter. In an age where ice appears magically in our freezers, it's hard to imagine that harvesting ice was once a major industry. Ice cutting was a brutal seasonal profession requiring immense physical strength and a healthy disregard for frostbite. When lake ice reached about 12 inches thick, usually in January or February, teams would descend upon frozen lakes with massive saws and picks. They'd clear snow from the surface, use horse-drawn plows to score grid patterns, then cut blocks weighing between 50 and 300 pounds each. It was the original cold-calling job, though significantly less comfortable than selling vacuum cleaners by telephone. The danger was constant. Workers regularly fell through thin spots, and many lost fingers to frostbite. The pay was decent, about $2 per day in the early 1900s, but the season lasted only 4 to 6 weeks per year. Once cut, the ice made an incredible journey. Blocks were floated through channels to ice houses, loaded onto sleds, and packed in sawdust for insulation. Well-stored ice could last through summer and even into the following winter. Their storage techniques were so effective that modern refrigerator manufacturers are still giving them the cold shoulder for putting them out of business. At its peak in the 1880s, the industry harvested an estimated 10 million tons annually from northern lakes. Major ice companies employed thousands and maintained elaborate distribution networks across America. The industry's decline began with mechanical refrigeration in the late 1800s. By the 1950s, home refrigerators had become common enough that ice delivery services were disappearing. The final blow came as electric freezers became standard features in American homes, turning the Iceman's career prospects as cold as his product: bowling pin setter. Long before automated machines took over bowling alleys, the job of resetting pins fell to human hands, typically teenagers looking for pocket money. These young workers would perch on elevated seats above the lanes, jumping into action the moment bowlers finished their rolls. For these kids, dodging flying pins and wayward balls was the original extreme sport, decades before ESPN would have called it Pin Ninja Warrior. The job demanded speed, precision, and a fair amount of courage. Pin setters had to clear fallen pins quickly, arrange fresh sets in perfect triangular formation, and return any wayward balls, all without getting clobbered by the next roll. A good setter could handle multiple lanes simultaneously, earning around 25 cents per hour in the 1940s. Working conditions were far from ideal. The noise was deafening, a constant symphony of crashing pins, rolling balls, and jubilant bowlers. Injuries were common, from bruised shins to crushed fingers. Most pin setters developed reflexes that would make modern video gamers look sluggish by comparison. Everything changed in the 1950s when the automatic pin setter arrived on the scene. By 1960, over 90% of commercial bowling alleys had converted to automatic systems, and the pin boys vanished almost overnight. Lector or factory reader. When you imagine early factory work, you might think of mind-numbing monotony, hour after hour of repetitive tasks with nothing but machine noise for the company. Yet in many cigar factories across America from the 1860s to the 1930s, workers enjoyed something remarkable: literature, news, and education, all while their hands stayed busy rolling tobacco. This cultural phenomenon centered around the lector, a professional reader hired collectively by factory workers. Perched on elevated platforms above the factory floor, lectors would project their voices over the din of machinery, reading newspapers in the morning, novels in the afternoon, and sometimes political works during lunch breaks. They were essentially human podcasts before electricity was reliable enough to power a radio. The position required exceptional skills. A good lector needed tremendous vocal stamina, dramatic flair, and the ability to hold workers' attention for hours. Many were former actors or had trained in public speaking. Workers themselves selected the reading material through democratic votes and pooled their money to pay the lector's salary. Factory owners initially supported the practice, believing entertained workers were productive workers. That attitude changed when they realized some reading stirred discussions about labor rights and working conditions. By the 1920s, many factory owners began banning lectors, and the final death knell came with radio's rising popularity. Elevator operator. Step into any modern elevator, press a button, and up you go without a second thought. Yet for much of the 20th century, elevators required skilled human operators to function properly. These uniformed professionals didn't just push buttons, they were part technician, part concierge, and part performer in the vertical theaters of America's buildings. Early elevators lacked automatic leveling and needed operators to manually control the car using levers and wheels. A skilled operator could stop the elevator precisely level with each floor, a technique requiring considerable practice. The best operators were so smooth you'd barely feel the stop, while beginners gave passengers what amounted to free roller coaster rides between floors. Beyond technical skill, elevator operators served as building ambassadors. They greeted residents by name, announced each floor's departments in department stores, and maintained proper elevator etiquette. In luxury buildings, they were expected to know which residents preferred conversation and which wanted silence. The profession began declining in the 1950s with the introduction of automatic elevators with self-service buttons. By the 1970s, fully computerized systems arrived, and the once common profession largely disappeared except in the most exclusive buildings where tradition and luxury remained selling points. Typist pool worker. Walk into any large office during the mid-20th century and you'd find an entire room buzzing with the rhythmic clacking of typewriters. These spaces housed the typist pools, groups of predominantly female workers who turned handwritten notes and dictation into professional documents long before computers appeared on every desk. The typist's day was structured around speed and precision. Each morning, supervisors would distribute work assignments, letters, reports, memos, and contracts that needed typing. Armed with manual typewriters that required significant physical effort to operate, typists would transform rough drafts into polished documents. The backspace key hadn't been invented yet, which meant that a single mistake on page 23 meant retyping all 23 pages. A punishment that would make modern office workers stage a revolution. Typing pools operated with almost military precision. Workers were evaluated on words per minute, accuracy percentages, and pages completed. The fastest typists could hit 100 words per minute with minimal errors using the touch typing method that had been standardized in the early 1900s. Supervisors prowled between desks, monitoring output and enforcing strict rules about conversation and breaks. The physical toll was considerable. Typists commonly developed carpal tunnel syndrome, back problems, and eye strain decades before these were recognized as workplace injuries. Despite these challenges, typist positions were highly sought after by women entering the workforce, offering better pay and conditions than factory work. Gas station attendant. The phrase full service at gas stations today might mean clean windshields or working air pumps, but for decades, pulling into a gas station meant sitting comfortably in your car while uniformed attendants sprang into action, pumping your gas, checking your oil, cleaning your windows, and even inspecting your tires, all with a smile and often a complimentary roadmap. Gas station attendants were ubiquitous on American roadways from the 1920s through the 1970s. They wore crisp uniforms with bow ties or caps, regardless of weather conditions, and knew the mechanical basics of most vehicle models. The position required knowledge of automotive fundamentals, excellent customer service skills, and the ability to make correct changes while standing in pouring rain or blazing heat. They were the original multitaskers, somehow checking your oil with one hand while making small talk about your muffler with the other, all while never mentioning the suspicious noises coming from your transmission. A typical station employed 4 to 6 attendants working in shifts, with the busiest stations serving hundreds of vehicles daily. Many stations built customer loyalty through their attendants who remembered regular customers' preferences and vehicles. These weren't just service positions, but entry-level jobs in the petroleum industry. Many future mechanics, car dealers, and even oil executives started their careers pumping gas. Film projectionist. In the darkness above every movie theater audience once sat a highly skilled professional whose art remained largely invisible when done correctly. Film projectionists were the unsung heroes of cinema, responsible for transforming strips of celluloid into magical moving images through a combination of technical expertise, split-second timing, and occasional creative emergency repairs. The job demanded precision at every step. Films arrived in multiple reels, each containing about 20 minutes of footage. The projectionist had to assemble these carefully, checking for damaged frames and splicing reels together with specialized tape. During screenings, they monitored the projector continuously, adjusting focus, managing carbon arc lamps that could reach temperatures of over 3,000 degrees, and preparing for the critical changeover, switching from one projector to another without the audience noticing a break. A perfect changeover was like a magic trick. Nobody applauded because nobody knew it happened. Make a mistake, though, and you'd have hundreds of people instantly transformed into film critics. The projectionist's booth was a technically complex, often uncomfortable space. The noise from projectors was deafening, heat from the lamps stifling, and fumes from celluloid potentially hazardous. Despite these conditions, many projectionists developed deep pride in their craft, belonging to specialized unions that maintained high standards and protected their unique profession. Some projectionists became so attuned to their machines they could identify problems by sound alone, like doctors diagnosing an illness just by listening to a cough. This skill became particularly valuable when something went wrong mid-showing and 300 people suddenly became very interested in what was happening upstairs. The projectionists' era began fading in the 1970s with the introduction of automated systems and xenon bulbs that required less monitoring than carbon arcs. By the 1980s, multiplexes with central projection systems reduced staff needs, and the digital revolution of the early 2000s rendered the traditional film projectionist almost extinct. Lamplighter. At dusk in certain American neighborhoods as late as the 1950s, a solitary figure would make their rounds, carrying a long pole and sometimes a small ladder. These were the late-stage lamplighters. the final generation of workers who tended the remaining gas streetlights that had once illuminated all of America's cities. Unlike their 19th century predecessors who used long poles to light wicks, these modern lamplighters maintained sophisticated gas mantle systems. Their daily routine involved checking gas pressure, cleaning glass globes, replacing mantles, and making minor repairs to fixtures that were often decades old. In winter months, they might also need to thaw frozen gas lines or clear snow from lamp tops. They were essentially keeping the lights on for nostalgia, like that one friend who still insists vinyl records sound better, even though they spend most of their time fixing the turntable. While most cities had converted entirely to electric streetlights by the 1940s, historic districts in places like Boston, Philadelphia, and New Orleans maintained gas lighting for aesthetic and cultural reasons. These areas employed specialized workers to care for these increasingly rare fixtures, preserving a connection to the past while navigating modern safety regulations. Newspaper delivery boy. Dawn breaks over quiet suburban streets. A small figure on a bicycle weaves from house to house, tossing rolled newspapers with practiced aim toward front porches. For much of the 20th century, the newspaper delivery boy was as much a fixture of American neighborhoods as the milkman or mail carrier. This was typically a young person's first venture into the working world. Delivery routes were assigned by territory, with each carrier responsible for 50 to 100 houses. The job started painfully early. Routes had to be completed before customers left for work, meaning carriers were often up by 5 a.m., even on weekends and regardless of weather. Their ability to function before sunrise made them suspect to normal teenagers who considered noon an unreasonably early hour to be conscious. The economics were straightforward but required responsibility. Carriers purchased papers from the publisher at wholesale prices and kept the difference after collecting subscription fees directly from customers. This created a mini business model where young carriers learned about profit margins, customer service, and the consequences of sleeping through an alarm clock. The job required developing a throwing arm that could land a newspaper on a porch from 20 feet away while biking past at full speed. Many delivery boys could have had promising baseball careers if only scouts had been awake at 5 in the morning to see their pitching skills. The position shaped American childhood for generations. In 1950, an estimated 900,000 young people delivered newspapers nationwide, representing a significant percentage of working adolescents. Library card catalog keeper. The hunt for information once began with wooden drawers filled with meticulously organized index cards. Behind this seemingly simple system stood the library card catalog keeper, a guardian of knowledge responsible for creating and maintaining the roadmap to every book, periodical, and resource in the library's collection. Card catalog keepers were information professionals with extraordinary attention to detail. Each new acquisition required multiple cards, author cards, title cards, subject cards, all written by hand until the 1970s. Precise handwriting was essential, as was mastery of cataloging rules that determined exactly how each entry should be formatted. A single error could effectively hide a book from searchers forever. Their handwriting had to be consistently perfect. It was the original font selection before computers, except you couldn't just highlight and click Times New Roman when you got tired. The job was far more complex than most visitors realized. Catalog keepers use specialized classification systems like Dewey Decimal or Library of Congress to assign each item a unique location. They track new editions, repaired damaged cards, updated cross-references, and periodically reorganized entire sections to accommodate evolving knowledge. Major libraries employed teams of catalog keepers who processed thousands of new items annually. The New York Public Library's card catalog contained over 10 million cards at its peak, each one created and filed by human hands. Coal delivery driver. The rhythmic sound of coal sliding down a metal chute into a basement bin was once as familiar to American households as the hum of an air conditioner is today. At the center of this now-forgotten heating infrastructure was the coal delivery driver, a soot-covered essential worker who kept homes warm through brutal winters. Coal delivery was physically demanding work. Drivers navigated trucks filled with tons of coal through narrow streets, then filled heavy canvas bags or metal buckets and carried them to each customer's coal chute. A typical single-family home required multiple deliveries each winter, with each delivery involving several hundred pounds of coal. These guys had forearms that would make modern gym enthusiasts drop their protein shakes in awe, all developed without a single Instagram workout post. The work followed seasonal patterns. Summer months were slow, while the first cold snap of autumn would trigger a flood of urgent delivery requests. Savvy drivers maintained detailed records of each home's usage patterns and storage capacity, often scheduling deliveries before customers realized they were running low. Beyond physical strength, successful coal drivers needed excellent driving skills, knowledge of different coal grades and their burning properties, and the ability to navigate stairs while carrying heavy loads without damaging property. Coalmen were among the few people welcomed despite tracking black footprints through your clean house. Try that as a regular visitor and see how quickly you get handed a mop. TV repairman. When the family television failed in the 1950s or 60s, panic ensued. No evening entertainment, no news, no children's programs to keep the kids occupied. The solution wasn't buying a new set. It was calling the TV repairman, who arrived with his toolbox ready to diagnose and fix whatever ailed your precious electronic centerpiece. Television repair was a specialized skill combining electronics knowledge, mechanical aptitude, and customer service. Early televisions contained dozens of vacuum tubes, glass components that frequently burned out and needed replacement. A skilled repairman could identify failing tubes by the symptoms they caused: horizontal lines, poor sound, or complete failure. These technicians were like television doctors, complete with diagnostic tools and the ability to say, "This won't hurt a bit," right before you received a bill that definitely did hurt. The job involved both shop repairs and house calls. Many repairmen maintained storefronts where customers brought smaller sets, but console televisions, massive wooden cabinets that were furniture as much as electronics, required on-site service. A typical house call involved removing the back panel, testing vacuum tubes with specialized equipment, replacing defective components, and adjusting various dials and controls to optimize performance. Some repair shops had waiting rooms where you could watch another TV while yours was being fixed, creating the odd experience of watching a healthy television to show you the importance of having a working television. It was like sitting in a dentist's office where all the magazines were about dental health. Business boomed as television ownership exploded. By 1960, nearly 90% of American households owned at least one television, creating steady demand for repair services. Technical schools offered specialized television repair programs, and many technicians earned comfortable middle-class lives through their expertise.